Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Eitan Berger. Growing up with the aromas of delicious food in her mother and grandmother's kitchen, Sheri Hanson teamed up with her friend Nicki Toys to create a cookbook entitled Lechaim. Written as a tribute to Sheri's late grandmother, all the proceeds of the book were donated to the Jewish Women's Benevolent Fund, an organization that was close to her grandmother's heart.
My grandmother, Vera Devimas, came here from England and when she was getting married and signed up for the Jewish Women's Benevolent and served for over 60 years. Voluntary work, raising funds to help Jewish children go through school, young adults get jobs by going through university, and giving Jewish families food and clothes as a means of survival. And when she passed away, I wanted to do something in her memory. Nicki asked me if I'd like to do a recipe book with her, and I said if she'd do it for charity, we had a deal.
In fact, the front cover of the book has Vera Devimas' teacups, and that's also another way we tried to honour her and make sure that she lived in the book. To put the book together took lots of time and lots of energy. It's actually a really fun project that we did. And lots of cooking, of course. Every recipe was tested and cooked, and to see whether it came out great or not. Most of the recipes are done with Shabbos in mind, recipes that you can make Shabbos with, either Friday night or a Saturday lunch, according to Jewish law. Most of the recipes come from Sheri or myself. A lot of them come from other sources, like my mother or Sheri's grandmother, who had handwritten recipe books that she had given to Sheri. So we looked through those. And if the recipe came from somebody else or a different source, then obviously we gave that source.
Food's such an important part certainly in Jewish life, and it definitely brings families together. I mean, we've spent many hours in my mother's kitchen, in my Boba's kitchen, in my granny's kitchen, and it definitely is a way to bring people together, which is why we wanted to make it a Shabbos cookbook, because we're lucky enough as Jewish people to have a time once a week, every week, where we can get together, regroup, think, spend time with our cell phone, computer, iPad off, and just connecting. And that was what some of the inspiration behind the book was about.
One of my favourite recipes, or that has significance, are my mother's recipes. Her recipes feature prominently in the book, and they're recipes that I've been eating over Shabbos for many years. And most of her recipes are actually quick and easy, and she has been a great source of inspiration for me in the kitchen. And I'm proud to have had her in the cookbook.
I also have both my parents are fabulous cooks, and I've got lots of their recipes in the book as well. And I think that those are the recipes that you remember most, the food that you grow up on. It took us about a year to do the book, from beginning to end, with the photography. We used my brother as the photographer and my sister-in-law as the food stylist, so it really was a family affair. And I have to say that for anyone who would want to do something for charity, it is the most rewarding experience that one can have, to raise that kind of money for people in need. So as a challenge to the community, it really is something that's worthwhile doing. So the fundraising was left to the women who do it best, which is the Jewish Women's Benevolent, and their pivotal branch headed by Lee Browse and Glenn Wallman. The funds will be used for all the Jewish Women Benevolent projects, which are education for Jewish children, anything that families under the Jewish welfare umbrella would require.
This is something that we really wouldn't have been able to manage this amount of money to raise for charity any other way. So we are both extremely proud that we were able to do this. The response has been amazing, and we hope to sell out soon. We've printed 2,500 copies, and I think we have about 200 left. So we get involved, be part of our beautiful community, and get stuck in. It's great.
what we wear has the power not only to change our appearance, but also has the ability to transform our internal experience. Throughout Jewish history, there have been special belts, wigs, hats, and robes. But today, perhaps the most common are seen within the prayer environment. Today, Rabbi Liebenberg demonstrates how to correctly wear the talis, or prayer shawl, and tefillin, or phylacteries.
The mitzvah of tzitzit and tefillin are two of the most important mitzvot in the Torah, namely because they are done every single day. In the case of tefillin, 6 days of the week, not on Shabbat. In the case of tzitzit, every single day. And I'd like to demonstrate to you exactly how one fulfills these two mitzvot. There are a number of principles that apply that one should keep in mind when it comes to performing these mitzvot. First of all, they are both mitzvot that apply only during the daylight hours. So that means from a short time after dawn, right until sunset, one can fulfill these mitzvot. You can put on talis and tefillin. It doesn't have to be as part of a prayer service, although as a custom, we wear the talit and the tefillin in the morning service. Another few important principles. When it comes to putting on the talis and tefillin, there are two principles, halachic principles, that are in play. One of them is Malin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. That when it comes to matters of holiness, we always ascend. We go up in holiness and we do not go down. Now, how this applies to talis and tefillin is as follows. First, the talis is placed on, and then afterwards the tefillin. Why? Because we're going up in levels of holiness. The talis is an object that we use to perform a mitzvah. Tefillin, however, are of a higher sanctity because they contain within them Shemot Hashem, the names of God. So first one puts on the talis and then the tefillin. The second principle is Ein ma'avirin ala mitzvot. When it comes to mitzvot, when you have a number of mitzvot to do, you do not pass over one mitzvah to do another. The first one that comes to hand is the mitzvah that you must do. So therefore, you have to make sure that first the talis is available to you, then the tefillin worn on the arm, and then the tefillin that is worn on the head. The tefillin worn on the head is the most holy of all because it has 4 separate compartments, each of which contains scrolls. Whereas the tefillin worn on the arm has only 1 compartment and a single scroll. Now, the demonstration will be according to Minhag Ashkenaz, the common custom that is kept by Jews of either Eastern or Western European descent. Usually what happens is when the time to put on talis and tefillin comes, before one puts on the talis, you will say what's called a kavanah, a meditation. This is something that is said quietly, and it focuses the mind. You can find it in each and every siddur, and it speaks about the concept of tzitzit. What is the purpose of this mitzvah? Why are we doing it? What should we keep in mind when we are about to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit? Before one puts on the talis, one has to examine the tzitzit to make sure that they are still kosher. Because they are threads, they are strings, they are prone to breaking quite easily, and the knots sometimes come undone. And therefore one begins by placing the talis over the shoulder and having a quick examination. This is not something that should take long, just a few seconds, to make sure that everything is intact. So in each of the 4 corners of the talis, one looks at the strings and looks for the following. Are there 5 sets of knots with 2 knots in each set? And are there 8 strings, 4 on each side? If you've had a cursory glance and everything seems to be in order, then you can begin to fulfill the mitzvah of talis. And the way in which it is done is that one puts it over one's head, lifts it up over the shoulders, throws it over the left shoulder, and at that point, when one is wrapped in the talis, because the actual mitzvah is what's called ituf tzitzit, to wrap oneself in the talis, at that point one says the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitatef b'tzitzit. Blessed are you, God, our King, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with His commandments and commanded us to wrap ourselves in the tzitzit. When the tzitzit are wrapped around one's face, there are a few verses that have to be said, so it's a good idea to learn these off by heart. And once one has said that, then one takes the talis off the head, off the face, and puts it on. And there is a unique way in which it must be worn. The main thing being that the talis must be worn as a cape, as opposed to a scarf. There are smaller talisim, but the big talis that is worn as a cape over each shoulder, with 2 of the tzitzit in the front and 2 of the tzitzit in the back. After putting on the talis, we then move to the tefillin. Once again, there is a kavanah, there's a meditation prayer, this time a little bit longer, that speaks about the tefillin. Where in the Torah do we find that tefillin are mentioned? There are 4 paragraphs. And in this prayer, we mention the different concepts in each one of these paragraphs. The fact that God took us out of Egypt, the fact that He sanctifies the firstborn, He took us out with a mighty arm and an outstretched hand. We speak about the fact that tefillin are mentioned in the Shema, the belief in God, love of God, fear of God, and that we are commanded to do His mitzvot. So once one says this meditation, he will then put on the tefillin shel yad, the arm tefillin. So it's important that these should be removed from the bag first. Now, the tefillin shel yad can be a little bit tricky to put on. And the way in which it's done is as follows. First of all, one exposes the arm, and one puts the tefillin on the bicep, about 2 fingers up from the elbow is the lowest point at which the tefillin must sit. And it should be worn in such a way that when one puts down one's arm, they are facing inward towards the heart. In fact, the Torah says that these words shall be upon your heart, a hint to the fact that the tefillin should be facing towards the heart. So once you've got them in the proper position and you're ready to tie the knot, you begin to tie the knot, and as you do so, you make the bracha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahaniach tefillin.
Blessed are you, God, our King, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with His commandments and has commanded us to put the tefillin on. Once one has said that blessing, one is not permitted to speak until one has concluded the mitzvah of tefillin. In other words, only after one has put the head tefillin on, because that blessing counts for both, even though there is a unique and special blessing that is recited for the head tefillin. So one then begins to tie the tefillin around the arm, and one makes 7 coils around the arm, and then one comes to the hand and just merely wraps it around the hand, leaves it like that until after the head tefillin have been put on. Now you can actually see the difference between the arm tefillin and the head tefillin just by looking at them. The arm tefillin is a single box. It also has a unique shaped knot that looks like the letter Yud. The head tefillin is again a box, but this time with 4 separate compartments. So you can see this from the outside, and on either side of those compartments is the letter Shin. In one case the Shin has 3 heads, and in the one case it has 4 heads. So it's very clear the difference between the tefillin from the outside. Also, the tefillin that are worn on the head have a unique knot. In some tefillin it's a single knot that looks like a dalet. In other cases it is a knot that looks like 2 dalets, a double dalet knot. So one takes the tefillin of the head and places it over the head, and again this can be a little bit tricky because it has to be worn in the exact right position. And therefore, it's not a one-size-fits-all. If you're borrowing tefillin or you just got a new pair of tefillin, it's very important that this has to be adjusted to your head. The knot of the tefillin should touch the back of the head, just where you feel that small indentation. And the front part of the tefillin, the bayit, the actual compartment, must sit just above the hairline, or for those gentlemen who have no hair anymore, where the hairline used to be. The tefillin should not be worn here in the forehead. And they should be positioned so that they are exactly between the eyes. Again, this can be tricky. To ensure that your tefillin are in the proper position, one can make use of a mirror. Because the Torah says that they have to be bein einechem, between the eyes. That does not mean that the actual box is between the eyes, but they're above the hairline in the area between the eyes. Now, when you're putting the head tefillin on, you have to make sure that there is nothing between the tefillin and your body. And the same applies to the tefillin worn on the arm, that they should go directly onto the skin. There should be nothing between the tefillin, what we call a chatzitza, a break between the tefillin and the skin. So one must make sure that there's no shirt in the way, jewelry, whatever it may be. The same thing applies to the tefillin worn on the head. So when you're putting it on, perhaps the idea is to lift up the kippah, the yarmulke, to make sure that the tefillin is sitting on your hair, and then afterwards to put the kippah back on. When one is putting on the tefillin of the head, one says the following blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu al mitzvat tefillin.
Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with His commandments and commanded us regarding the mitzvah of tefillin. After you've put on the tefillin properly and it's correctly adjusted, then you make sure that the straps are coming either side of you, the longer strap on the right side, the shorter strap on the left side, with the black side facing forward. Once the tefillin is all correct and in the right place, one says the following phrase, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Now one can go back to the arm tefillin. Now if you remember, the arm tefillin was wound around the arm 7 times, and then it was put around the hand. So what one does now is one unwinds the straps that were on the hand and winds it around one's finger. Not unlike the way in which one would put on a wedding band. And in this case, 3 bands. So 3 times on the middle finger, and then around the hand to form the shape of the letter Shin. And when one is winding the strap around the middle finger, you say verses from the prophet, and these verses speak about marriage. God uses a metaphor of betrothing the Jewish people to Himself. And He says the word ve'erastich, I will betroth you to me. He says it 3 times. So as we are making those winds around the middle finger, we say those phrases, and we say that word ve'erastich, I will betroth you to me forever, with faith, with love, 3 times. Once that is done, one has now fulfilled the mitzvah of Tallis and Tefillin. When one has completed the mitzvah, or one has come to the end of the morning service, you will remove the Tallis and the Tefillin, and you will go backwards to the way in which you put it on. So in other words, the last thing that you did was to wind the Tefillin around the finger and the hand. This will be the first thing that you do. Then you'll take off the head Tefillin and wind it up. There are many different customs as to how one winds it up, but you will wind up the head Tefillin and then place it back in its container. Then take off the arm Tefillin, wrap it up and put it back in the container. And you have to put it back into the container, whether it's a velvet bag or some other container, in such a way that you will remove the arm Tefillin first and then take out the head Tefillin. Again, keeping in mind the principle of ein ma'avirin ala mitzvot, that we do not pass over a mitzvah, and the first one that comes to hand is the mitzvah that we do. Once you've wrapped up your Tefillin, then you take off the talit, you fold that, and you put it back into the bag. And it's customary to have very nice containers, such as velvet bags, to keep one's tefillin and one's talis in a good condition. So this is how we go about fulfilling these important daily mitzvot of wearing talis, tzitzit, and tefillin.
This week, we continue our series, Raising Your Child with Soul. Focusing on setting up boundaries within the home, Slovie Wolff explains how technology can affect relationships by hindering communication between people.
It's a very difficult and challenging world today to raise our children. It's as if you're entering another country and there's a new language and parents can't really keep up. And children know that their parents don't know as much as them often. So it brings a lot of arrogance to the children. You know, when you get a new gadget, you give it to your child, even if your child's 9 years old, right? You'll figure this out before me. That brings a lot of arrogance. It never used to be that children feel that they know more than their parents. So besides all the technology and inappropriate texting and cyberbullying, there's this added element that I have this secret life over here that maybe you don't even know about. And you can put controls on your child's technology, but I've spoken to many, many parents, and the children have outsmarted the controls. So what's the answer, really? Number one, if you do give your child a computer, be sure that you have a public space in your house where you place the computer. Because if other people are in the room, there's an awareness. It's not the same that you're in your own room, in your own world, cut off from your family. And that really is a problem today. The Wall Street Journal calls our homes the dead zone, because everyone is dead to each other. Nobody's speaking to each other. I'm not even talking now about inappropriate technology, but just having barriers and being in a silent world that we have stopped communicating. We communicate with everybody but the people in our homes and our families. So that's number one. And number two, there's one word that is really key here, and that is communication. Parents must have open communication with their children. That means that there's trust. That means that we develop that trust. It means that we don't wait for problems to come. It means that we're not always on our technology when we're speaking to our children. So many parents say to me that they don't know why their children now don't talk to them. And I say, well, these past few years, when you got all your phones and your smartphones, every time you had a meal together, or you went to a restaurant, or you were in the car, were you speaking to somebody else or checking your email? Because you have lost that vital connection with your child, and you've taught your children that this is normal, to be with a family and not speak to your family. And you can't then one day wake up and say, how come nobody's speaking to me anymore? They're all on their phones, they're all texting. We have no relationship. Because there really is no replacement for a mother or father. The Hebrew word for parent is horim, connected to the word morim, which means teacher. I am my child's greatest teacher. It's how I speak. It's how I answer the telephone. It's how I relate to my husband, to my wife, to my children. And if I leave it to technology, my child has no role models. And I have abdicated my responsibility as a mother and as a father. The greatest role that I can have, and never belittle it, is to be the one who raises the next generation of our people.
Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai lived during the 1st to 2nd century CE and was the leader of the Jewish people at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple at the hands of the Romans. In Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 2, verse 8, he said, if you have learned much Torah, do not take credit for yourself. It is for this that you have been formed. Sadly, that's all we have time for this week's episode of Simcha. Thank you so much for joining us. We love to hear from you, so please find us on Facebook at Spirit Sister Productions and drop us a line. From myself, Eitan Berger, and the whole team here at Simcha, have a great week and goodbye.